you. Yeah, yo. There whenever it matters, and even more when you feel like it doesn't. Protect you so you never feel like you wasn't. Know I'm right alongside you. Either that or I'm behind you, but always got you. End of discussion, nothing means more. First one to offer is shoulders for what you reach for. Thought I saw the eyes of the world until I seen yours. And know that I ain't see a better view yet. I'm with whatever, so don't ever you fret. Know that you covered, not a hurdle or a heartbreak. A change what a partake, cause none of them won't ever get comfortable in your walkway. My job is to aware you, fully loaded, prepare you for all of the above that I'm never letting get near you. But still in all, give you every advantage I found. Couldn't find a better fit for them, along with my crown. And since the baton was passed, I've been down. Cause failing's not an option, and dad is not a noun, not at all.
My message to any dad, man, first off, know that, yeah, it is a hard job, but it's the greatest job in the world. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't change anything about it. Everything you're doing from here on out, if it didn't have purpose before, now it has purpose. It's the most important thing you'll ever do. Just be a dad.
Welcome to another episode of Dad Is Not a Now. My name is Ishmael, changing the narrative for men of color of fatherhood, as well as changing the narrative on the things I care about. And today, I have the returning champ back on. National, international, amazing poet, as well as was featured in the Time magazine, and he is with me today again. And we're going to have a great conversation. Alejandro Jimenez, thank you for coming on, brother.
No, thank you for having me on again, man. Appreciate it. Appreciate you.
You know, the first question I'm going to ask you, how's your heart?
It's good. It's good. I think it's very it's tender, you know. But it's tender, and at the same time, just filled with like a lot of despite everything that's going on, like it's just just full of with a lot of like hope and joy and just happiness, you know, seeing how, you know, with the topic we're going to talk about today, like just seeing my students, how they're stepping up, you know, and asking and wanting to know and want to get informed. And so it's really beautiful. So it's feeling a lot of emotions, but I think a lot of them are more positive than not. So
Definitely. And let's get into this conversation. With the administration taking over, they said this is what they're going to do. So you have this mass deportation going on right now. You had one in Chicago, one in Boston, and one in Newark. And it's ironically is in black and brown communities. Ironically. And this is not laughing because it's funny, because it's a serious issue. And because of this mandate they put out, now they can go into schools and churches. You being a guidance counselor, most of your students are now natural born citizens, what the administration is trying to end. Like, how do you deal with this duality of reality, being realistic, but still giving them sense of hope in this time and current landscape we're in?
for sure, yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely, you know, not a new conversation we're having, you know. Like, I think I've been in education now in this role or similar roles for the last 15 years, right? So you know, I first started doing community organizing with young people in 2009, right? With the Obama administration, I was in office, and then I switched to full-time working with young people in schools in 2011, right? I've been doing that since ever since. So it's not new. You know, the field of deportation is not new at all. I think kind of definitely there's like new levels of fear, right? Especially with the current administration that just goes unchecked, really, you know, and everything's like in place for them to go unchecked, you know. So what was, you know, a system, in this case, you know, deportations or whatever, ICE, you know, like what was already a scary machine just got scarier, right? And so, yeah, with this, you know, attack on the Constitution, that was like the 14th Amendment, right? Like, your birthright, you're born here, regardless of where your parents are from. If you're born here, you're a citizen, right? And so when that's attacked, you know, within hours, you know, of the new president taking office. But then what's really cool, then it's like when it also went within hours of the executive action saying, hey, we want to end birthright for these particular people. Then within hours of that, you have a bunch of states being like, no, that's not cool. We're going to sue you, right? And states from all over the country, and then that executive action just got blocked a few days ago, right, 2-3 days ago, and by some federal court, I think, or something like that, right? So being like, yo, like this is not cool, right? And so and it's definitely struck in a chord with, with even though a lot of my students are the majority of the students are born here, they're still part of mixed status families, right, where they might have citizenship or some sort of legal status, and then but their parents might not, right, or extended family people that they live with might not, right. And so yeah, I think how do we give people hope? I think just staying informed. I think students have a lot of questions and a lot of fear, right? Because that's their tactic, right? It's always been their tactic, is just fear mongering, right? And I said, like, it's nothing new, but just like the level that it's gone to, it is new, right? And it's in some ways, right? So yeah, just staying informed, and letting students know, like, hey, like, today things are going to be this way, tomorrow they might be different, next week they might be different, right? And celebrating the little wins, like the one on Thursday or Friday, whenever it was, when they blocked that executive action, that was trying to attack birthright. So celebrating those wins, but also not resting and staying, staying locked in, so that we don't get caught, slacking. So
Facts. And I think it's about being engaged in the political system, understanding your rights as a citizens, because I think a lot of people don't know their rights when it comes to the Constitution. When you talk about the 14th Amendment, uh, these are valid things that everyone need to know, especially kids. They have to know their rights. And I know you posted something social media with a poem, a video poem that you posted. And can you just talk about the things that people need to know, like in case like ICE do show up to a school or church? What are like the basic things that they need to know?
for sure, yeah. I mean, and these are like, I'm doing all these know your rights trainings with students this week. Um, you know, uh, Kind of what I was telling them, it's like these are rights that are given to anybody really that's on U.S. soil, right? Whether you've been here or born here or immigrated here, like, these are your rights, right? And they're no different than, like, in this case we're talking about ICE when it comes to immigrants, but they're the same rights you have, like, when someone pulls you over, regardless of if they're ICE or not, right? So those are like, you have the right to, like, not, the Fourth and Fifth Amendment, right? Basically, right? So you have the right to, like, the Fourth Amendment to, like, yeah, you have the right to not consent to be searched, right? Without a warrant that is signed by a judge, right? So, in this case of ICE, they might show up with, like, a warrant that's signed by, like, an ICE official. It doesn't count, right? It has to be an immigration judge or some sort of judge that signs it, right? So that's the Fourth Amendment, right? So you have the right to not consent to let ICE in, to not be searched, right? You have the right to the Fifth Amendment, right, to not incriminate yourself, right? So you have the right to remain silent, right? And not answer any other questions, and you have a right to an attorney, right? And knowing that you don't have to sign anything, right? So a lot of times we get scared, and ICE will bully people and use these scare tactics that they've always used to get people to trick. That's the important thing. Trick people into opening the door, into signing things that they're not supposed to, into getting in arguments. That's their whole freaking job, right? They're trained to do this, to get a rise out of people, right? And so those are the things, right? You don't have to consent to let them in. You don't have to consent to speak to, or you don't have to speak to them, and you don't have to sign anything, right? And sort of fourth and fifth amendments of the Constitution that protect those rights for people.
Definitely. And then also just talk about that other element of worrying about like your neighbors snitching on you, because you're gonna see some of that where you're gonna have someone that's gonna call ICE. Yeah, I think they're here, I think you need to come here. Like, it's just, unfortunately, you have to think about that too. Like,
Yeah,
some
yeah.
people that you think they're cool with you aren't really cool with you.
For sure, yeah, and I think that's like the other thing, that's like just brings up this thing, of like who can you trust, especially when we hear of like there's a law right now that's being proposed in Missouri. It's a bounty law they're calling it, right? Where people who report people who are undocumented get $1,000.
Mm.
Bounty hunter law, right? Like that's like, especially when we're thinking about the fucking South. Sorry for cussing. Like, especially when we think about the South, right? Like, what does that remind us of, right?
Yes.
Um, and it's in Missouri of all places, right? Like, or Mississippi, one of the M's, right? Like, it's like, um, and it's probably gonna get passed, right? Like, yo, someone who's undocumented, report them to us, and we'll give you $1,000, right? How many scalps can you get, um, or whatever, so it's yeah, so aside from the fear, it's also like the mistrust. Who can you trust, but that's also like the cool thing about being in a community, right? um and that's something that like I feel as immigrant people we we're accustomed to, to have kind of have this like sixth sense, of like, okay, what do we need to be cautious, and who can we trust or not? And I think that's the sad part that like this is doing, that like just you know um, I think the new government, an administration preaches this whole like unity, which every party does, but really they're like doing all these things to do anything but,
No, and I think too, like, you see this rise of like this, but it's been the underbelly of this country since it's been its birth. Is that you see this fascist rhetoric, movement when it comes to policy, and then you have people that voted for this administration try to say it's not, and try to be logic about what they're doing when it comes to undocumented workers. Like, I
Mhm.
can't. It doesn't make sense to me. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's you can't reason with people. I think one of the things that like I was telling students this week when we were speaking about it is like, even they don't know what they want. What we know is they don't like us, they don't want us, unless we're just like doing their work, for them. And even then, you know, um, and so yes, like they can't even understand their own ideology, right? You have JD Vance, who like 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, it's like, yo, we can't pardon writers who were violent. And then all the writers from January 6th that got pardoned, a lot of them were violent, and he's celebrating it. So it's like this contradiction. You can't like, you know, like it's really hard reasoning with people who are really hypocrite. They're just like, but if we were to do it, then obviously it's different, right? Or any community color or whatever. So yeah, that's like the hard part, right? That you can't reason with folks, like you cannot reason for whatever, the issue may be. Like there's always something. There's always something that, you know, uh, that they'll cling on to, for whatever fear of, black people taking over the country or whatever, being erased or whatever replacement theory they want to talk about, right? Like, and this rhetoric, right? Like the
Right.
story that is being created by these news outlets, by these politicians, by you know, QAnon or whatever, like. And at the end of the day, it's like, man, you're just like they're using working class people to just fight working class people, regardless of race, color, or whatever, right? And rich people are gonna get richer, right? And like at the end of the day, it's like working class people just going at each other,
Yeah, and that's what.
like.
Yeah, and this is what they want. But also just talk about like the the factor of when you have a Latin community, not all, but a portion of that of Latin community that's willing to assimilate just to be a part of a white identity because they feel like that's going to save them. Like there is like a race class in the Latin community, whether you're talking about between people from Spain, whether Mexico, whether Puerto Rico, exists. The lighter skin you are, the better situation you are. And like some families, like you have to date a white person, or just to make it. If you want to like dabble into that a little bit.
For sure, yeah. I think I can speak for Mexico. Yeah, I'm not sure what the history was in like other countries in Latin America and like the Caribbean and stuff like that, including Brazil, right? Like and Belize and Suriname and Guyana. Like Mexico at one point under Spanish rule, right? The colonizers, and at some point there was this thing called the caste wars, right? In southern Mexico. That that's where like it really took place, but there was something like 30 different castes, right? Or different, that was like basically like if you're full European, you're a top, right? And then if um, like if you were like full indigenous or like full African, you were the very, very bottom, right? And then intermixing then gave you like the other 30 something in between, right? Um, and so yeah, like this is very ingrained, right? This is not something that's new, right? This has been hundreds of years in the making, right? And that's just been like instilled in our psyche, right? And we still like, um, you know, it's so good that we don't even realize that we're doing it, right? Until someone points it out, right? Um, and yeah, so it's like we're fighting. Yes, like we can say like, oh yeah, over 50% of Latino men who voted for Trump, right? Like you know, but we also you need to understand that like this has been centuries in the making, right? Um, you know, um, and that started in our home countries, right? And then we come here, and it's like, what can we do to survive? What can we do? And a lot of that is like denying ourselves, right, of ourselves, and you're right, to like assimilate to those like Eurocentric, like standards of beauty or ways of thinking or ways of doing things that like just takes our humanity away, or conforms our humanity, right?
Right.
um, and then they give us Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz,
Yeah.
these white Cubans who are, I'm like, whatever, maybe they have their own stories, but it's like, man, like why why these guys, like which their experience as white Latinos is very, very different than my experience as a dark skinned Mexican in this country. So um and yeah, it's just, yeah, we need to understand, yeah, like it's not just the last 10, 15, 20 years, it's the last 300, 400 years,
Yeah.
and it started in home countries where the Spanish came and did a very, very good job of creating those systems that we hate ourselves.
And I think they did just a just if you want to talk about doing a I don't want to give them props on it, but they just did just they made it to a point where, like you said, to hate ourselves, and the only way we'll like make it is if we have to assimilate to that ideology of, like you said, that European ideology that think like a white person, thinking like a white person, you'll succeed in life. That's why they're pushing that word merit. You know, everything should be merit. Everything should be still merit. And this country has never been on a merit playing field. Never, ever, ever, ever in its existence. But what I worry
I
about,
mean, they sell
never,
these illusion of what you're saying, like, of
yeah,
merit, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy. And what I worry about too is like when you have this disconnect. When I tell people, like, when you talk about one of the oldest languages in America is Spanish. Like,
Hmm.
s- if you go into the history of just America in general, like Spanish is a historical language in the Americas
Mhm.
before people start speaking English.
Mhm.
So what I get frustrated when people say, "Oh, they need to speak English," it's like, dude, this is the oldest language in one of the oldest languages in the Americas. So they're speaking their natural tongue.
Mhm.
Like America is just new.
Mhm.
This is a new country, one like still a new country if you think about it. And it just frustrated me how people like your own people are saying that too. It's like,
Mhm.
dude, like you're Spanish.
Which is really funny because like, well, it reminds me of two things. Like one, like or I guess three things. One, like Saint Augustine, right? Like in
Yeah.
Florida, right? Like it was like the oldest, or I can't remember if it was like the first one or one of the oldest like Spanish,
Right.
settlements. Even though Florida was never really part of the Spanish, it wasn't colonized by the Spanish, but they had like a settlement there in Saint Augustine, I believe it's called. And then I live in a place right now, Santa Fe, New Mexico, where um, by the time the U.S. Declared independence from Great Britain in like 74, 76, right? Santa Fe, was like the northern capital of the Spanish Empire in the Americas. At that time, it was already like 150 years old, right? And so yeah, like I think as and before that, right, like because Spanish is still like a colonized language, right? Before that, there was sort of like the indigenous peoples, right? And so that we could move freely, right? And like between, like there was like a lot of evidence and like a lot of like you know um, things that you would find like let's say like there was a bunch of like native peoples here that were trading with people from southern Mexico, right? That's why you see corn up here, right? That's why you see certain um, type of shells that you would only see in like certain parts of Mexico. You see them up here, and vice versa. That's why you see turquoise down there, right? Because it was traded, right? And a lot of folks, some folks in depending on the indigenous group in Mexico, right, and other parts of Central America, like they saw this particular area as like as a holy site, right? That they wanted to come visit, as like a pilgrimage, right? Like, like a Muslim person might want to go to Mecca, right? Um, so we forget that there's, a lot of history, right? Even before the Spanish, right? That like there's always been movement, right? The Spanish, when they came into Santa Fe, they came on this thing called what they called El Camino Real, right?
Right.
But really, it was the trading route that Native peoples had been using for like hundreds and hundreds of years, right? Uh, and that then connected to other trails in Central America that then connected to the Incan Trail, right? Like, so it's like well, it's always been connection, right? Like, but again, it's just those histories and those identities that we don't want to acknowledge, right? That like this movement is not new; it's always been happening. You know?
And it's important too because it connects the dots too. Like you see what's going on with immigrants, you see what they're trying to do with other minorities with like these executive orders that that impact black people, but it's going to impact all minorities. You know, when you talk about the equal rights protection when it comes to jobs. But again, it's a constitutional it's a law passed. But again, the reason why he's signing these executives because they want a court fight. They want this. They want these to get to the Supreme Court and let Supreme Court decide whether it's this unconstitutional or constitutional, as well as natural born citizenship. It's the same thing. They want this fight. So, like, what are your thoughts about that? Like, we do have commonality because what
Mhm.
impacts um, undocumented workers impacts everybody at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. And I think something we also need to like understand about immigration is that Latino, yeah. So as Latino folks, we make the largest group of undocumented, right? Folks, but it's everybody, right? Like I was just looking at like um I think it was at one point the largest, fastest growing undocumented work group in America at one point was Chinese workers or Chinese folks, right? And that was Filipinos, right? And then um, there's this thing called TPS, right? Temporary protective status or something like that, right? That like a lot of countries get, right? And I was just looking at the list before I got on this call, and I was like, yeah, there's a lot of countries like the Middle East, you know, uh, Central America, South America. But there's also like 5 or 6 countries from Africa, right? That like South Sudan, Cameroon, Somalia, Ethiopia, right? That like basically the government decides, all right, cool, we're gonna give you legal status or this protective status, right? It's not even citizenship or a green card or nothing. It's just saying you can stay here. We won't deport you. And what it says, right? A lot of those, I think all of those countries I just named, um, or I think it's a list of like about 15 countries. Like most of them will end their, in 2025 is when their permission expires, and then the government, it's up to the government to decide whether they want to keep those going, right? Haiti is the other one, right? Um, and then the rest of them in 2026, right? Afghanistan, right? Lebanon, all these other countries who are like in like a lot of like a war, right? Um, and so that will just be up to this administration to be like, yeah or no, right? And yeah, and so I think that like there's, that we need to think about it, like that what they're saying is like, well, it's the Mexicans, or it's the Mexicans, or it's the Hondurans, and the Hondurans, and really it's like a lot of folks, right? And but they're not gonna complain about the Ukrainians, they're coming in, which please welcome in, right? They're like their land's getting all messed up because of like whatever whatever those countries are going through, right? Like let them in, and like don't let them step over like the people that have been waiting in line literally at the border to get in because their countries are also war torn, right? Because a lot of it can be tracked down to like U.S. intervention and destabilization, right, of that region. So um, yeah, so again, we need to like understand this, on a global scale, and again, that's like something that this administration will not understand, and even in past administrations, Democrats as well, right? Like, they're not, they're like, oh, America, or whatever, they're like, because the whole Ukrainian stuff happened under Biden anyway, so it's like, um, so it's just frustrating, to have a system that's just in place to, make people at the bottom fight against each other. Workers
Yeah,
fight against each other. People
yeah,
at the
yeah,
top just chill,
yeah.
reap the benefits, collect the money,
And it's crazy too how it's interesting too how like the White House, this administration, like recently just took out the was it the Spanish website version of the of White House information on the White House website. That
Yeah,
kind of tells you,
within like a day or two, something like that.
that
Yeah,
should tell you enough right there. That they're like that's where they stand.
yeah,
Um, but also, what I worry about too, we're going to have a huge debate. I know people don't want to talk about it, but I think we're going to have a debate what defines a citizen in this United States. I think this is the biggest. I think this will be the biggest debate within the coming years. If it's true, like all these things go to the Supreme Court and they decide the factor, and so this is what I'm worried about too. Because again, they're gonna have to go back to the history to define what is a citizen. Is it 2 generations back? Is it 3 generations back? Is it 4 generations back? Is it when the colonies, when America, when it was ratified and we became the United States? Like how, what, where does that begin of defining citizenship in this country?
yeah. It's really interesting, if that debate does come up. Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting. How the debate is if it does happen. And what that made me think of was like I think Native Americans, right? They didn't get the right to vote in this country till like the 1920s. Native American,
Yeah.
right? And even now, like like New Mexico is one of those minority majority states, right? And has one of the largest Native American populations, or American Indian populations in the whole U.S. And there's been like I think part of the Navajo Nation is in New Mexico. Most of it is in Arizona. But the president or the governor of that of the nation came out and was like, yo, like to the Navajos, we were like, yo, watch out, because you look Mexican, and you're brown, and so carry your tribal ID cards and tell them that you're a citizen and all that kind of stuff, right? And so like in the Native community, like that's also going on, right? That like, look, you're gonna be targeted because you're brown, right? And even though you've been here, like literally you've been here for like over 50,000 years, or and so yeah, and so like also the fear that it's creating amongst that community too, um, and just because they're going to racially profile, right? And to your point, right? How can you tell someone who is a citizen and not a citizen? Um, you know, especially just by looking at them, right?
Because you know about the history, like when we had like in the past massive deportations of Latin people, they deported citizens too. Like if you go back to Operation Wetback,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the citizens they deported, they were citizens of the United States,
Yeah,
but because
even as
they
early
were
as 2010, 2009, when Obama was in office, right, which supported the administration supported the most people ever, right?
yeah,
Or in recent times deported like what in the 8 years it was like 4 million people or something like that, right? I think it was um, about 10 to 20%, depending what stats you look at, were either green card holders, right? Um, or citizens of the U.S. that had either gone through the naturalization process or were born here, right? 10 to 20%, right? And so it wasn't, like in that era, it was like like, oh, we're going to go after these criminals, and it's like, well, like like 10% of like people that you deported, yes, like you had like really horrible offenses, right, that they had done. But 90% of the people that you deported were like driving without a driver's license. Of course, you can't get a driver's license if you're undocumented in a lot of these states, right? You don't have car insurance. Of course, you cannot get it if you're undocumented, right? Or you're jaywalking, you have broken tail light, right? Um, all these like I want to say petty theft, but it's not even theft. It's just like you can't get these rights because you don't have a legal status. So how am I
right,
supposed to go to work?
right,
How am I supposed to pay rent? How am I supposed to buy groceries? How am I going to contribute to the economy?
right,
But we find a way, right? And so um, I think that like that's that's a fear around, right? That's like, oh, is it going to be another repatriation or what do you call it, Operation Wetback, that like it was in the
right.
during the Great Depression, right? Um, so we'll see how it goes, and how they're definitely setting up the stage for yeah, just heavy anti-Mexican rhetoric, anti-Mexican with like declaring the cartel as a terrorist organization, and then saying, hey, we're also going to rid the U.S. out of foreign gangs. And I was like, well, okay, what does that mean? Like,
Right.
but we know that like cartels, 70% of the weapons the cartels use come from the U.S., right? And the drugs that are used, that they're transporting is because there's a demand here,
Yeah.
so
And and,
how do we
and
tackle all these issues, right?
seriously, and the funny thing about it, they keep on talking about the gang M13. M13 is we're based out of Los Angeles. They're an American
Yeah,
gang. They're not
yeah,
a gang from a Latin country.
yeah,
They've started out in Los Angeles, but they're drawing this narrative like this bad gang out of a Latin country. No, they were based out of the United States.
yeah.
But again, when you talk about using that term terrorist, I think that's going to probably be their game plan of trying to end natural born citizenship is using that status as because their family came over here illegally. They're under that statute terrorist,
Hmm.
and that supersedes everything.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's I don't know, it just reminds me of like, like the Patriot Act, when like 9/11 happened. It's like, just like how much the national security, national security was just bonkers after that. And like now it's just like, okay, like are they trying to create something similar? Like, um, but we're not gonna tackle mass shootings in schools,
Yeah,
because
right.
that's too real, or that's an actual, worth fighting cause, Not that like, getting dangerous people off the street is not, but you know,
It's
I
just
don't know.
I don't know. Our priorities are messed up, and what I worry about is that we're like traumatizing the shit out of these kids, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have COVID, um, after COVID, you got these school shootings, you got like this nasty algorithm with social media, like kids not loving themselves and killing themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and then you got this situation. Like we're really fucking up kids' heads today.
Yeah, and like that's funny because like my girlfriend's an educator too, and we were just kind of talking about them making those connections. I was like, we were driving somewhere, and we were talking, right? We were going to the gym or something, this weekend, and she pointed it out, and I was like, dang, that is true. Like just the last 5 years, I'm like, dang, like the isolation happened during COVID, and then all these other events, and then this big thing, and it's not like we're gonna be on quarantine and we'll hope it'll be gone in 2 weeks, It's
Yeah,
like we'll hope it'll be gone in 4 years,
yeah.
or whatever, So yeah, it's you're right. I think it's at the same time when we think about it in those terms, right? And I think about this week when I'm with my students and going doing these know your rights trainings, and they're engaged, right? And they're like, oh, this is my mom needs this, my dad needs this, all right, my family needs this, all right, and they're asking questions. I'm like, oh, like they're engaged, and like
Mm,
just from the face value, like their spirit seems so like bothered,
okay.
and it's just like, all right, we're stepping in, we're down 10 points and we got 2 minutes, to make a few baskets, let's see what we can do, you know.
And I think, and it starts with you. It starts with us as adults, just because kids want to learn. They want to soak up as much as they can. But the reality is that it's so much coming at them at one time,
Hmm.
you know. And it's how do you like try to install the positive things and not let them kind of hinder on those negative things that is going to happen. Older generations say we went through it, and we built that tough skin, and so we can handle anything. But my thought process is that you went through it, so your kids don't have to go through it.
Hmm. Yeah.
But if you look at it, we did a poor fucking job of doing that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's as a school counselor, I read it for me, it's like, giving students, the time to just vent. I think one of the things that um, having been undocumented myself in this country, like it was something we talked to students about, not necessarily in this context, but just in other contexts too, I'm like, yo, like I have that perspective, right? That like I was here on this side and now I'm this side, right? In whatever situation, right? A breakup, a heartbreak, whatever it is, immigration, whatever, like y'all don't have that perspective, right? Because you're young,
Right.
one, right? And two, yeah, you haven't lived enough, to be like it is, it's gonna be really rough before it might get okay, right? And so I think the idea that like being realistic with them, but also not and not trying our best to not instill more fear, like hey, like so I think yeah, this week when I was going to classrooms, they're asking all these questions, I'm like, oh, like everybody's situation is gonna be different. Every state's gonna react differently to this. Um, we have the luxury of living in a state that's very immigrant friendly, right?
Right.
And and we live in a sanctuary city, right? Which that's really huge, right? which means that like they will not use any of the resources to help ICE, right?
Right.
Confine people as of now, right?
Right.
And so doing that, right, they're like being like, hey, we're gonna take it one day at a time, take it a week at a time, and the best things that I feel like we can do is be in community, know our rights, and stay on top of the laws, and don't let panic, and fear like get the best out of us. Some days, we'll be fearful, and some days we'll believe the rumors, and that's okay, But like, important thing is to like not dwell, and then ask, And so I think as adults, that's what we have to do, I think when I was, I shared this with my students this week. I was like, when I was in their shoes, when I was in high school, I was like, we never talked about this because people didn't know how to talk to us about it. Like you go up to the teacher, be like, "Yo, I'm a documenter." Like, what is that? Like what? It means I can get deported. Like, well, what is that? And I was like, well, like, and so, but I think now that like, even though the fear is so, or the tools, the power that this government now has at its disposal is so much more than it was 10 years ago, than it was 20, 30 years ago. The knowledge that we have to how to defend ourselves is also so much bigger and so much more, right? And the example of people resisting is, not just here locally, not just here in the U.S., but also globally. Is like, it's beautiful and that's inspiring, right? We also have that, because of social media, because of all these things, that we can communicate more quickly and be like, oh, that's what they did over there. Maybe how we do something similar here, or whatever, So, and I think for us as adults, that's our role, like we don't know if things are going to be okay. So I try to stay away from saying that, like, because I don't know, and and I don't want to give you false hope. I
Right.
want to give you things that you can focus on that are in your control,
Yeah.
because that gives you purpose, right? That gives you a sense of like, I'm gonna get up tomorrow and do this next thing, you know, and it keeps the fear away, keeps the depression away. If I can have something to look towards that I can organize towards, that's what I
Fact.
try to do as a counselor.
And that's why I appreciate you coming on the podcast, because I think in these uncertainty days, it's good to have someone on who has optimism, but it's reality. And I appreciate you for coming on. What's going on? What do we got looking forward to from you coming out poetry wise? And how can people find you?
Awesome. No, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Appreciate the space and the platform. My poetry self, I've been trying to write more. But I had a book out last spring, and I took a lot to get it out. But I think right now I've been kind of just chilling, So I've been, traveling the country, doing stuff. A lot of stuff with youth, a lot of stuff with school districts, with different companies and that kind of stuff, which is really good. So I don't know. I think in the midst of all of this, I don't know I think I want to create more art, but I think right now I'm just like super focused on like, okay, how can I show up for my students? How can I organize my community? And how can I get those allies, those citizens who like
Yeah.
put their bodies in front of mine,
Yes.
So I'm like,
Yes.
how can I, use that guilt, in a positive way? So yeah, so I think that's where my focus has been, not so much on art, just because like I said, like the last book took a lot. But still traveling, still doing shows and that kind of stuff. But yeah, you can find me on, AlejandroPoetry.com, Alejandro Writes on Instagram. Um, and, um, and yeah, so but that's kind of, that's where we're at.
All right. Thank you, brother. I really appreciate you. And this has been another amazing podcast interview here at Daz is Not a Now. And my last final saying is that we have to be willing to sacrifice something if we want to see better days. Um, the reality is that we're afraid to sacrifice. We stick to our brand, and so we stick to our brand. We're willing to lets things slide when we know it's not the right thing. And so I pose this question to people who's going to watch this interview is what are you willing to sacrifice in the face of doing something right and just and righteous? Again, this is an amazing conversation and we're out. Peace. All right, stay on for 1 second. I'm going to end the recording.